Hello. Welcome to tonight's bedtime story by Lucid Tales. I hope your day has been peaceful and full of warmth. But whether it has been sunny skies or rolling thunderheads for you, it's time to relax now. Find somewhere comfortable, maybe your bed or a favorite armchair, and make sure you're ready for sleep. Take a few deep breaths if you can, and feel the freedom in your chest, the little loosening that means it's time for bed. Tonight is the final part of A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. Scrooge stood in the cold snow, the final chime of midnight still ringing in that frozen air, and the phantom slowly, gravely, silently approached. It was shrouded in a deep black garment, which concealed its head, its face, its form, and left nothing of it visible save one outstretched hand. But for this it would have been all but impossible to distinguish from the night around it. "I am in the presence of the ghost of Christmas yet to come," said Scrooge. The spirit answered not, but pointed onward with its hand. "You are about to show me shadows of the things that have not happened but will happen in the time before us," Scrooge pursued. "Is that so, spirit?" The fabric of the garment moved a little. Perhaps the ghost had nodded. Although well used to ghostly company by this time, Scrooge feared the silent shape so much that his legs trembled beneath him, and he found that he could hardly stand when he prepared to follow it. The spirit paused a moment, as if observing his condition and giving him time to recover. It thrilled Scrooge with a vague, uncertain horror to know that behind the dusky shroud there were ghostly eyes intently fixed upon him, while he, though he stretched his own to the utmost, could see nothing but a spectral hand and one great heap of black. "Ghost of the future," he exclaimed, "I fear you more than any spectre I have seen. Will you not speak to me?" It gave him no reply. The hand was pointed straight before them. "Lead on," said Scrooge. "Lead on, the night is waning fast, and it is precious time to me, I know. Lead on, spirit." The phantom moved away as it had come toward him. Scrooge followed in the shadow of its dress, which bore him up, he thought, and carried him along. The city seemed to spring up about them, the heart of the bustling and crowded exchange, where the merchants hurried up and down and chinked the money in their pockets and conversed in groups and looked at their watches. The spirit stopped beside one little knot of businessmen. Its pale hand pointed toward them, and Scrooge drew closer to listen. "No," said a man with a monstrous chin. "I don't know much about it either way. I only know he's dead." "When did he die?" inquired another. "Last night, I believe." "Why, what was the matter with him?" asked a third, taking a vast quantity of snuff out of a very large snuff-box. "I thought he'd never die." "God knows," said the first, with a yawn. "What has he done with his money?" asked a red-faced gentleman with a pendulous excrescence on the end of his nose that shook like the gills of a turkey. "I haven't heard," said the man with the large chin, yawning again. "Left it to his company, perhaps." "He hasn't left it to me, that's all I know." A general laugh. "It's likely to be a very cheap funeral," he continued, "for upon my life I don't know of anybody who'd go to it. Suppose we make up a party and volunteer." "I don't mind going if a lunch is provided," observed the gentleman with the excrescence on his nose. Another laugh. Scrooge knew the men, and looked about for his own image, but another man stood in his accustomed corner, and though the clock pointed to his usual time of day for being there, he saw no likeness of himself among the multitudes that poured in through the porch. Quiet and dark, beside him stood the phantom with its outstretched hand. When he roused himself from his thoughtful quest, he fancied from the turn of the hand and its position that the unseen eyes were looking at him keenly. It made him shudder and feel very cold. They left the busy scene and went into an obscure part of the town, where Scrooge had never been, though he knew its ill repute. The ways were foul and narrow, the shops and houses wretched, the people half-naked, drunken, slipshod. Alleys and archways, like so many cesspools, disgorged their offences of smell and dirt and life upon the straggling streets, and the whole quarter reeked with crime, with filth and misery. Far in this den there was a low-browed, beetling shop, below a penthouse roof, where iron, old rags, bottles, bones, and greasy offal were bought. There were piled up heaps of rusty keys, nails, chains, hinges, scales, weights, and refuse iron of all kinds. Sitting by a charcoal stove made of old bricks was a grey-haired rascal, nearly 70 years of age, who smoked his pipe in all the luxury of calm retirement. As Scrooge and the Phantom came into the presence of this man, a woman with a heavy bundle slunk into the shop, closely followed by another, and she was followed by a man in faded black. All three stared at one another and burst into laughter. "Look here, old Joe," said the first woman, "if we haven't all three met here without meaning it." "Well, friends," said Joe, removing his pipe from his mouth. "Welcome. None of you are strangers, so come on in together. Let me shut the door. Go, how it squeaks." While he did this, the woman who had already spoken threw her bundle on the floor and sat down, looking with bold defiance at the other two. "What odds then, Mrs. Dilber?" she said. "Everyone has a right to take care of themselves. He always did." "True indeed," said the laundress, taking a seat beside her. "None more so. We ain't going to pick holes at each other." "Not at all," agreed the man in black, who sat down beside them both. "Very well then," cried Mrs. Dilber. "Who's the worse for the loss of a few things like these? Not a dead man?" "If he wanted to keep him after he was dead, that wicked old screw," pursued the first woman, "why wasn't he kinder in his lifetime? If he had been, he'd have had someone to look after him, instead of lying gasping out his last there alone by himself. Anyhow, open the bundle, Joe. I ain't worried about these lots seeing what's in it. We all knew we was helping ourselves before we met here. No sin in it." But the man in faded black leaned forward and handed Joe his plunder first. It wasn't much. A seal or two, a pencil case, a pair of sleeve buttons, and a brooch of no great value. They were examined and appraised by old Joe, who chalked the sums he was disposed to give for each upon the wall, and added them up into a total when he found there was nothing more to come. "That's your account," said Joe, "and I wouldn't give another sixpence if I was to be boiled for not doing it. Who's next?" Mrs. Dilber was next. Sheets and towels, 2 old-fashioned silver teaspoons, a pair of sugar tongs, and a few boots. Her account was stated on the wall in the same manner. "I always give too much to ladies. It's a weakness of mine, and that's the way I ruin myself," said old Joe. "That's your account. If you ask me for another penny, I'd repent of being so liberal and knock off half a crown." "And now undo my bundle, Joe," said the first woman. Joe went down on his knees for the greater convenience of opening it, and having unfastened a great many knots, dragged out a large and heavy roll of some dark stuff. "What do you call these?" said Joe. "Bed curtains." "Ah," returned the woman, laughing and leaning forward on her crossed arms. "Bed curtains. You don't mean to say you took 'em down, rings and all, with 'em lying there?" said Joe. "Yes, I do," replied the woman. "Why not?" "You were born to make your fortune," said Joe, "and you'll certainly do it." I certainly shan't hold my hand when I can get anything in it by reaching out for the sake of a man as he was, returned the woman coolly. He isn't likely to take cold without him. And you may look through that shirt till your eyes ache, but you won't find a hole in it. It's the best he had. They'd have wasted it if it hadn't been for me. What do you call wasting it? Asked old Joe. Putting it on him to be buried in, to be sure, replied the woman with a laugh. Someone was fool enough to do it, but I took it off again. He can't look uglier than he did in that one. He frightened everyone away from him when he was alive, only to profit us when he was dead. Scrooge listened to this dialogue in horror. As they sat grouped about their spoil in the scanty light afforded by the old man's lamp, he viewed them with disgust, which could hardly have been greater though they had been obscene demons marketing the corpse itself. "Spirit," he said, shuddering from head to foot. I see. The case of this unhappy man might as well be my own. My life tends that way now. Merciful heaven, what's this?" He recoiled in terror, for the scene had changed, and now he almost touched a bed. A bare, uncurtained bed, on which beneath a ragged sheet there lay something, covered up, which, though it was dumb, announced itself in awful language. The phantom's steady hand was pointed to the head. The cover was so carelessly adjusted that the slightest raising of it, the motion of a finger upon Scrooge's part, would have disclosed the face. "I understand you," Scrooge returned, "and I would do it if I could. But I have not the power, Spirit, I cannot." He lay in the dark, empty house, with not a man, a woman, or a child, to say that he was kind to me in this or that, and for the memory of one kind word I will be kind to him. "If there is any person in the town who feels emotion caused by this man's death," said Scrooge, "show that person to me, Spirit, I beseech you." The phantom spread its dark robe before him for a moment, like a wing, and withdrawing it revealed a room by daylight, where a mother and her children were. The woman paced up and down, clearly awaiting someone. In time the knock at the door came, and she hurried to open it. A young man with a careworn and serious face came in. Her husband. "Is it good or bad?" she asked. "Bad," he answered. "We are ruined. He does not relent." "There is hope yet, Caroline. He is past relenting. He is dead." She was a mild and patient woman, if her face spoke truth, but her gratitude was stark on her face before a momentary guilt. "To whom will our debt be transferred?" "I don't know, but these things take time. Before then we'll be ready with the money. We're saved." Yes, soften it as they would, their hearts were lighter. It was a happier house for this man's death. The only emotion that the ghost could show him was one of pleasure. "Let me see some tenderness connected with the death," said Scrooge. "Some kind word." The ghost beckoned, and Scrooge took a step forward into Bob Cratchit's house. It was quiet. Very quiet. The noisy little Cratchits were as still as statues in one corner, and sat looking up at Peter, who had a book before him. The mother and her daughters were engaged in sewing, but they were very quiet. Mrs. Cratchit laid her work upon the table and put her hand up to her face. "The colour hurts my eyes," she said. "I wouldn't show weak eyes to your father when he comes home for the world. It must be near his time. Past it. He has walked slowly these last few nights." They were very quiet again. At last she said, in a steady, cheerful voice that only faltered once. I have known him walk with Tiny Tim upon his shoulder, very fast indeed." "And so have I," cried a child. "Often." "But he was very light to carry," she resumed, intent upon her work. "And his father loved him so that it was no trouble. No trouble. And there is your father at the door." Bob was very cheerful with them, and spoke pleasantly to all the family. He looked at the work upon the table and praised the industry and speed of Mrs. Cratchit and the girls. They would be done long before Sunday, he said. "Sunday. You went today then, Robert?" said his wife. "Yes, my dear," returned Bob. "I wish you could have gone. It would have done you good to see how green a place it is. But you'll see it often. I promised him that I would walk there on a Sunday." "My little, little child," cried Bob. "Oh, my little child." He broke down all at once. He couldn't help it. If he could have helped it, perhaps he and Tiny Tim would not have been as close as they were. He left the room, and went upstairs into the room above, which was lighted cheerfully and hung with Christmas. There was a chair set close beside the child, and there were signs of someone having been there lately. Poor Bob sat down in it, and when he had thought a little and composed himself, he kissed the little face and went back down. They drew about the fire and talked. Bob told them of the kindness of Mr. Scrooge's nephew, whom he had seen but once, and who, meeting him in the street that day and seeing that he looked distressed, inquired what had happened. "On which," said Bob, "for he is the pleasantest spoken gentleman you ever heard, I told him. 'I am heartily sorry for it, Mr. Cratchit,' he said, 'and heartily sorry for your good wife.' 'Oh, I'm sure he's a good soul,' said Mrs. Cratchit. Then the ghost's pale hand was pointing once more, and Scrooge found himself stepping out into the churchyard. But the ghost yet pointed, and Scrooge was helpless but to follow its instruction. He could not bring himself to read the name, but he felt an awareness, a sudden fear that perhaps the phantom's appearance meant something other than what he had thought. "Before I draw near to that stone to which you point," said Scrooge, "answer me one question. Are these the shadows of the things that will be, or are they the shadows of things that may be only?" Still the ghost pointed downward to the grave by which it stood. "Men's courses will foreshadow certain ends, to which if persevered in they must lead," said Scrooge. "But if the courses be departed from, the ends will change. Say it is thus with what you show me." The spirit was as immovable as ever. Scrooge crept toward it, trembling as he went, and following the finger, read upon the stone of the neglected grave his own name, Ebenezer Scrooge. "Am I that man who lay upon the bed?" he cried upon his knees. The finger pointed from the grave to him and back again. "Spirit," he cried, tightly clutching at its robe, "hear me! I am not the man I was. I will not be the man I must have been but for this intercourse. Why show me this if I am past all hope?" For the first time the hand appeared to shake. "Good spirit," he pursued, as down upon the ground he fell before it, "your nature intercedes for me and pities me. Assure me that I yet may change these shadows you have shown me by an altered life. I will honour Christmas in my heart, and try to keep it all the year. I will live in the past, the present, and the future. The spirits of all three shall strive within me. I will not shut out the lessons they teach. Oh, tell me I may sponge away the writing on this stone." In his agony he caught the spectral hand. It sought to free itself, but he was strong in his entreaty and detained it. The spirit, stronger yet, repulsed him. Holding up his hands in a last prayer to have his fate reversed, he saw an alteration in the phantom's hood and dress. It shrunk, collapsed, and dwindled down into a bedpost. Yes, my dearies, and the bedpost was his own. The bed was his own, the room was his own. Best and happiest of all, the time before him was his own, in which to make amends. "I will live in the past, the present, and the future," Scrooge repeated as he scrambled out of bed. "The spirits of all three shall strive within me. Oh, Jacob Marley!" He was so fluttered and so glowing with his good intentions that his broken voice would scarcely answer to his call. He had been sobbing violently in his conflict with the spirit, and his face was wet with tears. "They are not torn down," cried Scrooge, grasping one of his bed curtains in his arms. "They are not torn down, rings and all. They are here. I am here. The shadows of the things that would have been may be dispelled. They will be. I know they will be." He laughed suddenly, and for a man who had been out of practice for so many years, it was a splendid laugh. "I don't know what day of the month it is," said Scrooge. "I don't know how long I've been among the spirits. I don't know anything. I'm quite a baby. Never mind, I don't care. I'd rather be a baby. Hello there!" Running to the window, he opened it and put out his head. No fog, no mist. Clear, bright, jovial, stirring cold. Cold, piping for the blood to dance to. Golden sunlight, heavenly sky, sweet fresh air, merry bells. Glorious, glorious. "What's today?" cried Scrooge, calling down to a boy in Sunday clothes. "Huh?" returned the boy, with all of his might of wonder. "What's today, my fine fellow?" said Scrooge. "Today?" replied the boy. "Why, Christmas Day." "It's Christmas Day," said Scrooge to himself. "I haven't missed it." He leaned further out of the window. "Do you know the poulterers, in the next street but one, at the corner?" Scrooge inquired. "Well, I should hope I do," replied the lad. "Remarkable, boy. Do you know whether they've sold the big prize turkey that was hanging up there?" "What, the one as big as me?" returned the boy. "What a delightful boy," said Scrooge. "It's a pleasure to talk to him." "Yes, my buck." "It's hanging there now," replied the boy. "Is it?" said Scrooge. "Go and buy it. Go and buy it and tell them to bring it here, so I may give them the direction to take it. Come back with the man and I'll give you a shilling. Come back with him in less than 5 minutes and I'll give you half a crown." The boy was off like a shot. He must have had a steady hand at a trigger who could have got a shot off half so fast. "I'll send it to Bob Cratchit's," whispered Scrooge, rubbing his hands and splitting with a laugh. "He shan't know who sends it. It's twice the size of Tiny Tim. What a happy joke." He wrote out Bob Cratchit's address in shaking hand and thrust it into the poulterer's man's hand when he arrived. But of course, no, the turkey was much too big. He couldn't possibly carry it all the way. What a brute! He must have a cab to take him there, and back. The chuckle with which Scrooge said this, and the chuckle with which he paid for the turkey, and the chuckle with which he paid for the cab, and the chuckle with which he recompensed the boy were only to be exceeded by the chuckle with which he sat down breathless in his chair again and laughed till he cried. Shaving was not an easy task, for his hand continued to shake very much, and shaving requires attention, even when you don't dance while you are at it. But if he had cut the end of his nose off, he would have put a piece of sticking plaster over it and been quite satisfied. He dressed himself all in his best, and at last got out into the streets. He had not gone far when, coming on towards him, he beheld the portly gentleman who had walked into his counting-house the day before on charity business. It sent a pang across his heart to think how this old gentleman would look upon him when they met. But he knew what path lay straight before him, and he took it. "My dear sir," said Scrooge, quickening his pace and taking the old gentleman by both his hands, "how do you do? I hope you succeeded yesterday. It was very kind of you. A Merry Christmas to you, sir." "Mr. Scrooge?" "Yes," said Scrooge, "that is my name, and I fear it may not be pleasant to you." Allow me to ask your pardon. And will you have the goodness—" Here Scrooge whispered in his ear. "Lord bless me!" cried the gentleman, as if his breath were taken away. "My dear Mr. Scrooge, are you serious?" "If you please," said Scrooge. "Not a farthing less. A great many back payments are included in it, I assure you." "My dear sir," said the other, shaking hands with him, "I don't know what to say." "Don't say anything, please," retorted Scrooge. "Come and see me." "I will," cried the old gentleman, and it was clear he meant to do it. "Thank ye," said Scrooge. "I am much obliged to you. Bless you." At last he reached his nephew's house, and walked past the door a dozen times before he had the courage to go up and knock. But he made a dash and did it. "Is your master at home, my dear?" said Scrooge to the girl who answered. "Yes, sir. He's in the dining room, sir. I'll show you upstairs, if you please." "Oh, thank ye. He knows me. I know the way," said Scrooge, with his hand already on the dining room lock. He turned it gently and sidled his face in around the door. The party were gathered and just sitting down to the meal. "Fred," said Scrooge. Dear heart alive, how his niece started. Scrooge had forgotten for the moment about her sitting in the corner with the footstool, or he wouldn't have done it on any account. "Why, bless my soul!" cried Fred. "Who's that?" "It's I. Your Uncle Scrooge. I have come to dinner. Will you let me in, Fred?" Let him in? It's a mercy he didn't shake his arm off. He was at home in 5 minutes. Nothing could be heartier. His niece looked just the same. Wonderful party, wonderful games, wonderful unanimity, wonderful happiness. But he was early at the office next morning. Oh, he was early there. If he could only be there first and catch Bob Cratchit coming in late. That was the thing he had set his heart upon. And he did it, yes he did. The clock struck 9. No Bob. 1:15. No Bob. He was full 18 minutes and a half behind his time. Scrooge sat with his door wide open that he might see him come in. Bob's hat was off before he opened the door, his comforter too. He was on his stool in a jiffy, driving away with his pen as if he were trying to overtake 9 o'clock. "Hello," growled Scrooge in his accustomed voice, as near as he could feign it. "What do you mean by coming in here at this time of day? Come this way." "I am very sorry, sir," said Bob. "I am behind my time. It's only once a year, sir," pleaded Bob. "It shall not be repeated. I was making rather merry yesterday, sir." "Now I'll tell you what, my friend," said Scrooge. "I am not going to stand this sort of thing any longer. And therefore," he continued, leaping from his stool, "and therefore I am going to raise your salary." Bob trembled and took a step back. His employer seemed not in his right mind. "A Merry Christmas, Bob," said Scrooge, with an earnestness that could not be mistaken as he clapped him on the back. "A merrier Christmas than I have given you for many a year. I'll raise your salary and endeavour to assist your struggling family, and we will discuss your affairs this very afternoon, over a Christmas bowl of smoking bishop. Make up the fires, and buy another coal scuttle before you dot another I, Bob Cratchit." And so it was that ever after the name of Ebenezer Scrooge became known for his great kindness, warmth, and generosity, not to mention Christmas parties. Tiny Tim did not die, and lived to grow up, and Scrooge became a second father to him. Perhaps, if such a man can change, confront his own ignorance and greed, there is hope for change in even the hardest of hearts. Good night. Sleep well. And Merry Christmas to all of you who celebrate it.